Hello and a very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for episode 25 of the IET India Digital Conversations. It's so good to see all of you here with us today. Thank you for the time. Now, when we talk about a subject like what we're going to discuss today, which is about quantum leap for India, the technologies and its applications, we see that quantum is steadily becoming a widely used buzzword alongside AI, blockchain, ML, and others. Now, we're currently amidst the second quantum revolution, which will be responsible for most of the technological advances for the 21st century. The first quantum revolution helped shape the 20th century advances for the 21st century. The, I mean, there has been some uses of it which has been brought through semiconductors, GPS, AI, and lasers. But we all think that the second quantum revolution will take the rules and basics of technologies introduced in the first revolution and use them to develop new technologies. Now, this will help define quantum computing, sensors, simulation, security, and communication. But in spite of all these unique offerings and insights of quantum technology, along with a century of research, it does remain rather mysterious for most. But fortunately, today we have a set of experts who will unravel this mystery and also help us understand what is revolutionary about quantum theory and how has it changed our world. How does it help in unlocking advances in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity? How will it take, or how much will it take for India to ride this wave of quantum computing? I am Suman Vomik, your host for the series, and I lead the events development for the IET in India. And I would like to thank all of you for being with us today and giving us this time and opportunity. And we look forward to a very, very informative and a highly interactive discussion. I will pass this over to you, Reena, and I'll be around in the background if you guys need me.
Thank you. Thank you, Suman. And first of all, I would like to begin by thanking IET for organizing this session. When we do discussions with technical folks, with researchers, and even business folks, we come to the realization, I personally, felt that there is a fair amount of curiosity and sometimes even confusion around the area, the topic of quantum. People want to understand its context, its usage, and what is the future of quantum? What does it mean today? Is it a technology that is relevant for today, or is it something which is a myth? So many questions are there, and I hear those questions frequently. The nature of the questions changes depending on whether you're talking to a business person or to somebody who is, on the technical side. We have a pretty good set of people here today. And while the three of us cannot claim to be know-alls, I think we will be attempting to demystify some of this for you today. So I'm going to request, I will start the, discussion by requesting Professor Arun Pati and Professor Urbasi Sinha to give an introduction to quantum computing and quantum communication respectively. And then I will introduce the topic of quantum solutions. And Professor Pati, while you talk about quantum computing, if you could also talk about what is so exciting about it, and likewise, Professor Sinha. So over to you, Professor Arun.
Okay, so thanks, Irina. So quantum computing has been there for last 35 years or so. So it all started with, as some of you might know, it all started with Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of last century. So around 1982, he asked the question, so can you simulate complex quantum system on a classical computer? So that was starting point, and he realized at that time that if you aim to simulate quantum system on a classical computer, you will fail miserably. So that was the hint that led to think about actually seriously about quantum computing, and that was due to David Deuce in 1985, who first came up with the idea of so-called. Actually, he laid the whole foundation of quantum computing. The quantum church Turing thesis and quantum computing idea actually came due to David Deuce. So what happens is when you go to quantum system, unlike classical computer, when you store information in strings of zeros and ones, when you go to quantum domain, you know that quantum system can not only remain in two distinct states but also can remain in so-called quantum superposition. That means you can have access to two or more physical states in one go. Okay, so it is like saying that two states in one go, or two states at once. So that is the idea that led David Deutsch to realize so-called quantum parallelism, and uh, and not only this quantum superposition, but we now know that this weird feature of quantum theory, that is so-called quantum entanglement, also comes to play when you deal with two or more number of quantum systems. So essentially, when you have multiple number of quantum systems, they can remain in a strange kind of state which you don't see in classical world. Okay, so when I say strange, I mean that they somehow, even if they are far apart, they can be in a strongest possible correlated way. So that means if you are here, even if you are far apart, like in different planet or different in location in space, then still you can be correlated. So that kind of correlation actually could be in different places, or it could be inside your quantum computer. But that strange thing somehow helps you to build these new devices, so-called quantum computers, and with that, uh, the first realization came actually again due to David Deutsch and another scientist called Richard Jusa, who gave so-called first algorithm to demonstrate the power of quantum computer. In that particular algorithm, they try to show that there is a kind of thing that you can actually solve exponentially. I mean, exponentially faster compared to classical computer, because classical computer would take exponential number of steps, but you could do only single query. Okay, that is called Deutsch-Joja algorithm. And as you know, as history tells you that then came this so-called source algorithm and then Grover's algorithm in 1994 and 96, and that really led to revolution in quantum computing. And over last 30 years, tremendous progress has been made, not only in theoretical side but also experimental side. And as you see in the news, that not only scientists, actually many private companies are also investing a lot of money, starting from Google, Microsoft, and IBM, and many more companies are actually, they have already investing huge amount of money in building quantum computer. And why it is so exciting? Because once you have a quantum computer, it is not just a theoretical curiosity. You can actually resolve many class of problems which is not even feasible, not even imaginable in classical computer. Okay, so-called you might have seen in news that Google achieved so-called quantum supremacy. I mean, that kind of task is something which may take any classical computer like say 10,000 years, but they claim that they could do only 200 seconds. So that is really a remarkable demonstration of the so-called power of quantum computer. So that is just a single, I mean, just a small story, but it has potentially, I mean, completely revolutionized the way we imagine about uh, computing processor or computing abilities and so on. So it could change the whole finance sector or defense sector, and many applications you can imagine, starting from transport, starting from communication industries, and starting from security, or solving some complex problem in material science, and many things you can actually do. So that is why it is quite exciting, and 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 yeah. So I mean, the future is really open. What kind of things you can do with the quantum computer is still not clear, but with a lot of hope that it will completely change the way we imagine about our the way we handle our classical computer. Okay, so
So, Professor Pati, I'm going to ask a
mm,
question
mm,
regarding the algorithms that you talked about.
mm,
Uh, what is so exciting about these quantum algorithms? And for the benefit of some of the business folks in the group who
mm.
would be attending, right? Could you talk about how this changes the way computation, how quantum computers changes the way the computation happens, and why certain algorithms are more suited for quantum?
Yeah. So when you deal with quantum computer, it is not that it can solve all the problems efficiently or faster compared to classical computer. Okay, so you have to figure out what kind of problems you can actually solve on a quantum computer. So that is actually one of the biggest challenge in figuring out what kind of things actually you can do. You can implement on a quantum computer, which will demonstrate so-called quantum advantage or quantum supremacy or whatever you want to call it compared to classical computer. So if you recall the so-called source algorithm, so that is like factoring this prime factorization algorithm. So classically, it was known to be very hard. It can take exponential number of steps depending on the input size. Okay, but in the in a quantum computer, you can solve in polynomial time. So that is a huge reduction in complexity. The number of steps you need to do this kind of task. If you have this kind of device which can implement factorization in seconds compared to what it would take in a classical computer, say billion of years, then all the encryption that you are you're using in your day-to-day banking or day-to-day internet security issues, they will all will be they will get into trouble, right? So that is why majority of these companies are actually interested in investing money and trying to see what is really happening and what best they can do, and whether really they can build a quantum computer which can do such things or not. That is one of the things that excites private companies. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And on that note, over to you, Professor Urvasi, to talk about quantum communications.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Reena. And of course, thanks to IIT as well for organizing this very nice meetup. So regarding the quantum communication, if you don't mind, I would share a few slides because I think it'll speak better with the different types of people we have here. So yeah. So, of course, the idea is that I want to introduce the topic of quantum communication to you in a few minutes. And so what is quantum communication? Of course, it is a means of communication in which we are using laws of quantum mechanics. And these laws of quantum mechanics, we are using them in particularly what is called the key distribution problem, which is in fact why it should be in general quantum key distribution. And then the other aspects of the communication are not necessarily quantum, right? And so in fact, quantum communication is the most quote unquote practical quantum technology. So why you should worry about it? Now you should worry about it in the sense that, if any of these 4 applications that you see here is something that you worry about, whether it is buying something online, through a credit card, or even selecting your parliamentarian representatives, and this has been very much in the news for a different country recently, or defense strategy communication. So these are all examples of communication where, which stand a risk of being, these are basically what we would call strategic communication, right? And so as Arun just mentioned, that these sorts of things would be compromised with the advent of quantum computers. So what we currently do is what is called classical cryptography, and quantum computers will be able to run certain algorithms which will make some of these aspects not functional. And that is why we need a solution which is also quantum. Okay. So what is wrong with classical cryptography? Basically, what is wrong is that classical cryptography, unconditional security is not possible. So, for instance, you think about it, this RSA protocol, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which forms the basis for the most popular public key crypto. It's based on the mathematical complexity of factoring large numbers. Okay, and so Peter Shor here, he came up with an algorithm which using quantum gates can perform factorization in polynomial time, or actually make it much faster. So the point is that our computational resources are growing very fast, and so today's hard problem could be solved tomorrow using brute force attack. New algorithms can come for classical computers. Then, of course, as we have discussed, the realization of quantum computers will run a new class of algorithms as well. So my security should be independent of future advancements in computational power, new algorithms, or new technology. That is, it should be future secure. Okay. And this is what brings forth the need for quantum cryptography, where we have changed it altogether. So security is now based on laws of nature or laws of physics, and not on the mathematical complexity of a problem. So we have made this, it's a completely new ballgame now. And in that, the most important part is this key distribution, which is QKD. Now, going to what Arun just mentioned, I mean, of course, one has to realize that if you employ Shor's algorithm, it will actually take 4,000 qubits and 100 million gates in order to be really a threat to, let's say, the 2048-bit RSA. So you would say, why should we worry about it? Because we don't have 4,000 qubits and 100 million gates right now. But the point is that this quantum computing research is actually going very, very fast. Okay, and so today we have, let's say, around 100 qubits, but then this is going to go up, at a very interesting steep curve is happening. And so this is not very far in the future. It could be in a few years' time. And so we don't want to wait for that to happen, wait for our security to be compromised, and then come up with a solution. And so that is why we need to work on the solution from now, so that once the quantum computer comes with all its beautiful applications, the threat that it poses to the current security is not a threat anymore, because we would have switched to a completely new way of doing this, which is quantum key distribution, where of course laws of quantum mechanics are being used to protect the information. So just a little heads up. So as Arun went through the historical thing, in quantum communication key distribution protocols, we have these very popular ones. The BB84 is the first one, then B92. And then in entanglement based ones, again, we have BBM92, E94, E91, and many other variants. But then these are the common approaches to QKD. And entanglement is also required in making what is called device independent quantum key distribution. We can come to that in a discussion forum. So now this question is not just about, of course, quantum communications. It's also about this quantum internet, which is something that, we hear a lot about. So what is this quantum internet? That actually involves what is called long distance quantum communication. So now if I were to communicate with my student in the lab and have a quantum key exchanged, it's not very interesting. I mean, it's interesting, but then it's not very practically interesting. So we want to do this over longer distances so that parties can communicate with each other, which is separated by a long distance. And so here we have the problem come in, that if you want to do this using free space, then you have a line of sight problem. So beyond a point, you can't see each other, you can't do this. If you use fiber, then we have a problem that, you can't use this classical repeater notion because you violate what is called no cloning theorem. So you need to come up with a revolution here in order to do long distance. And so two approaches are being investigated worldwide. One of them is a quantum version of the repeater, and the other is what is called satellite-based quantum key distribution. So this quantum repeater part, I will skip for now. If there is interest, we can discuss more. I'll go quickly to the satellite part, which actually is what we are working on both technologies, but the satellite one is particularly the one advanced one. And so here the idea is that, these two ground stations, they need to be connected to each other through a quantum link. And in principle, could be thousands of kilometers apart. So a satellite will come on top of one ground station, exchange a key, then it will go, let's say, to the other one, which is in some other country, exchange a key, and then by certain mathematical operations, these two completely very, very far away ground stations are linked through a quantum link. So satellite is acting as a trusted node here, and this is something that will help in increasing the distance of communication immensely. And this is what leads to what is your quantum internet. So this is a quantum key distribution network. So here you have this satellite part which I just discussed. These guys are now connected, but then from here I can connect to different agencies. So we talked about banking, then we can have medical, use for this. So hospitals can use encryption. We can have our own cell phones connected to encryption, using quantum domain. Transport, it's defense, of course, is always there. So the possibilities are endless. And so all these guys will be connected to this particular node, which is going to give these keys out, okay? And so then that could happen through fiber also. So we'll have a combination of satellite and fiber, and that is the network we are talking about, where the entire world, as we hope, will be connected through this network, which would be essentially this quantum internet. So this is the idea. We'll have different nodes connected. And so, we can get back to this particular slide later, because if somebody's from the industry, then, we can have a discussion on how there are different layers, which decide on, how this key is distributed, and one of them will become quantum, but the rest of it remains pretty much what it was. And so in some sense it's all not very far in the future. So so I think I'd stop with that, Reena, if that makes with regarding the quantum communication part. But then I wanted to answer for half a minute why it is interesting. I mean, I hope what I just talked about it's already obvious that it should be interesting. I mean, we are going to revolutionize security in communication, and so naturally it is interesting from the application.
I hope so. Yeah, I find it very interesting, and I hope so people on the call find it as well. Yeah,
absolutely. But then the cerebral thing, which we are all interested in, Arun, me, and other scientists, it's as he mentioned, these principles which make all this happen at the end of the day are mysterious in some sense, superposition, entanglement. So we are using them towards research which is beneficial to people at large. And so nothing can be more interesting than that. So, I could go on and on, but in some sense that summarizes it, right? So we get the best of both worlds. We do fantastic stuff and people also use it. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah. I think that's great. And before I jump into the topic of quantum solutions and what's happening today in that space, I also wanted to take a pause and reflect on what Professor Arun and Professor Urvashi, both of you have talked about. And when I look at computing, I think and communications, what is more exciting for me as a person who's worked, in early parts of my career, I was a networking protocol person and then worked at the operating system layer. So the analogy that I find in all of this is that, hey, all of these are human constructs. When we decided that there will be something called a bit, which will be represented by the state of an electron, and we made that's a hypothesis we put forward, and then we created layers on top of it, right? How do you translate bits, and how do you do operations on top of it? So you have gates, and then on top of that you have something like a hardware translation layer, which allows people to then write software on top of it, right? Like your device drivers and stuff like that. And what if you can change the layer at the bottom? And that's what quantum does, right? In some sense, you're taking away the classical physics and replacing at the bottom by quantum physics. And theoretically, if you could replace that by anything. You could take chemical reactions at the bottom of the stack and then say that a chemical reaction of a certain kind represents a chemical state of a certain kind represents a bit, and then a chemical reaction of a certain kind through a catalyst is a gate operation, right? Theoretically, right? So I think it gets very exciting. If you're a computer engineer, it gets very exciting for you to think about the fact that, we should not forget that all of this is a human construct and an abstraction. And through quantum physics, we're probably getting a much better, more stronger form of computation for solving some of the most difficult problems that exist, as Arun pointed out, right? Those problems which are not solvable in a reasonable time frame by classical computers. So I get very excited about it, and I can see, I sort of agree with the excitement that both of you are reflecting. Also from a communication perspective, I really like the fact where you talked about the layering concept, and you said there's a quantum layer and everything else will remain the same. That is so important to understand, that when people say, oh, is quantum going to be so many years into the future, probably that understanding of how things are progressing is different to different people. So that sort of brings me to, that will bring me to my second question, but let me talk about the solutions first. So I'm going to take a cue from what Professor Arun talked about. He talked about Shor's algorithm and the various algorithms that are there. Now today, we do not have a 1000-bit qubit computer, quantum computer. We have limited hardware, although a lot of progress is happening. So what is happening today from a solutions perspective is that there is a realization that some of the quantum algorithms in a modified form can be applied on classical computers and can be done on classical computers, and that can help us solve some of the optimization problems in a much better manner than a pure classical algorithm running on a classical computer. So this is an area called quantum inspired, right? So it's an algorithm which is running on a classical computer and it's inspired from a quantum algorithm and hence quantum inspired. And basically, wherever you are looking for the lowest minima of a curve, we know that when you use classical computing, it takes a lot of computing resources and it's a very hard problem to solve. But using a concept called quantum annealing, it is possible to take some of those problems and apply quantum inspired algorithms, right? And we are seeing application of this in various industries, in the manufacturing sector for things like moving the precision with which a robotic arm moves to solve to execute a particular fine grained operation is done in a much more optimized manner if quantum optimized algorithms are being used. Similarly, uh, and this is a Microsoft project itself, where with Case Western University, we've done some work on optimizing the efficiency and the results associated with doing MRI scans, right? So speed up the scans, get more efficient results, so that tumors can be detected faster and less time is taken for each of the patients for doing an MRI scan, right? And so that the same machine can do many more MRI scans. So I think the point that I wanted to make is that a lot of these concepts are happening today. This is possible only because of the research that is already happening on the quantum side, right? These ideas for using quantum inspired for classical computing would not have emerged if the efforts were not going on for quantum computing and quantum algorithms itself, right? So this is an interesting byproduct which helps us leverage the power of quantum today itself, even when we don't have 1,000 qubit or 1,000,000 qubit, whatever, computer with us. And referring to, so that's my take on the quantum solution side, and hopefully it answers some of the questions that business people have, CXOs have, what should they be thinking about quantum and how should they be looking at it. All of these solutions that I'm talking about, they're built on the power of the research done by people like Arun and Urvashi, right? So I think that's where the work really starts. So going back to them with a different question, Urvashi, where do you think, what is really happening today in terms of the state of the art on quantum communication, right?
Sure.
At an international level. Let's take this question at an international level for now.
Sure. So, I mean, as I was saying, this quantum communication is actually the more advanced technology, with due respect to quantum computing, because you see, the quantum computing research is happening still at a level where, it is in the research lab. And then, of course, these big companies, including Microsoft, are pitching in and doing things. But then in the quantum communication, we are already using it for our everyday, life internationally, that is, at the moment. And so in terms of this, there's of course a lot of research, and then there are many companies which are making products like QKD devices are there. And then there is also a lot of usage in banking, as well as in defense, and these sectors are already using it in other countries. And so, for instance, lab scale demo is okay, but this long distance is what is interesting in terms of towards the quantum internet and so on. So there are different approaches being done in countries. So for instance, there is something called a backbone network, which means that you'll have different nodes which are connected to each other through maybe a fiber channel itself, but these are going to be the key distribution nodes. And so this sort of a backbone network is present in for instance, in China, which has the longest one, which is called the Beijing-Shanghai backbone network, is 2,000 kilometers. So 2,000 kilometers long network connected with quantum nodes. And so that is how they are using it in these various, there's one bank which is only using quantum for its security purposes, for instance, in this country. Japan has this backbone. Russia is attempting to build one. And so this is one way of this ground-based, so to speak. But now if I go to satellite-based, in satellite-based, there is one quantum satellite which is already up there, which is called the Messius quantum satellite. So that is the Chinese one. It's around 3-4 years ago that this was launched, and it is still there. And lots of demonstration has happened between different ground stations in China and one between China and Vienna. To have this long distance network through long distance communication through a satellite. But then there are other countries also which have their now own satellite program. So there is the European network program. Then there is the KeySat in Canada. Then there is something Germany specifically doing. We have some effort from Italy, and there is the UK one. We also have Singapore with its CubeSats, nano satellites. And I mean, China is of course still continuing. So these are Japan, and so these are some names to take. So the main point that we have to understand is that these are not science fiction things. So when, I mean, for instance, as you are already aware, so far as we are concerned, so we have India's first project on satellite-based quantum communication. But then this took a lot of effort to convince, that this is needed. And so now we have finished 3 years in the project, and so we are doing very well. But the point is that, when we started to sort of argue that such a project should happen in our country, it was still at a science fiction level, that people felt, this is not going to work. You send something up there and you actually will be able to have a quantum key. It seems really unlikely. But now it is definitely in the domain of science, and already a successful demonstration from a different country. And so it is very much being researched at different levels, at fundamental science as well as company and technology levels. So its status is fantastic so far as quantum communication is concerned, because we actually have market value for it for various sectors. So you mentioned international, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that's really valuable. And Professor Arun Pathi, could you talk about where quantum computing is internationally right now? Where do you think?
So internationally, as you might have seen and others might have seen, not only government agency but also private companies are also investing and taking interest in quantum computing. So, IBM has already launched this so-called 5-qubit processor in 2016, and then which was freely available for public use, and then in 2017 they launched the so-called 17-qubit processor, which is again freely publicly available. And I think more than 2,60,000 users are already using that platform to do the research and to do various studies. Not only from research community but also from industrial side also they are exploring this. And so IBM and Google, they are kind of and Microsoft are taking interest. But I think at the forefront, this IBM, Google, they are competing, and currently IBM has about 65 qubit processor, and by 2021, I think they are claiming that they will achieve something like 121 qubit quantum computer, and by 2022 they will achieve something like 433 qubit processor. So that is a big aim that they are trying to achieve, and most of the devices that either Google or IBM they are having, they are what typically in our community they call so-called noise, intermediate scale quantum computer. So why they are noisy? Because to have a real quantum computer, you should have an inbuilt error correcting method. Okay, unless you have that mechanism, because you see, when you want to store information in your qubit and want to run an algorithm, typically the qubit will undergo so-called decoherence. So decoherence is the time over which this superposition is actually lost. Okay, so you have to do all your physical operation within that time. Okay, so it is a great challenge when you scale up your number of qubits. Not only they try to interact among themselves, they also try to interact with the external world, and as a result, they lose the coherence. And that is one of the greatest challenge since the inception of the idea of quantum computer. And what currently we have is these kind of, whether you build 100 qubit or 400 qubit quantum computer, they will be kind of a noisy quantum computer, because you don't have a error correction mechanism to protect this qubit undergoing decoherence. So these companies are trying to overcome this kind of hurdles and how to really scale up. So the goal is that maybe next 10 years they will have something like 1000 qubit quantum computer, which will probably kind of they will be able to make this error correction inbuilt with the device. So that is the kind of status currently international side. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's very insightful. I'm also going to share a little bit on what's happening on the software side. While we're talking about the development, I talked about the abstraction layer that needs to exist for people to really use the power of quantum computing. And one of the things that I think both of you would agree is that, and I think Arun, you talked about it, is that every problem is not solved. Quantum is not the best solution for every problem, right? For example, if you wanted to add 4 plus 4, you don't want a probabilistic answer. You would probably want to do it on a classical computer. So from a computational perspective, we are seeing the strong need for having a classical computer and a quantum computer working side by side, and therefore a need for application solutions to be able to access both these computers, both these stacks at the same time. I think so. That's one of the things that that is the real cutting edge work that is happening in the industry, and that's something that Microsoft has just announced as well, right? It is something that we are working on, where we've integrated the two stacks in a manner where applications can use both of them in a very seamless manner and build algorithms on top of that. And at the bottom of the stack are different kinds of hardware, right? So today we do not really know which hardware will really, because there are multiple approaches to quantum computing that that people are taking. And in fact, I heard a bit, I have seen a few cases of focus of using either laser based or photonics based, like pure photonics based approaches as well. And maybe Professor Urbasi, you can talk a bit about that. But considering that there are so many different variations of creating qubits that people are considering, including at room temperature, including at close to 0 degree Kelvin, and variety of semiconductor based approach, photonic based approach, and so on. So the industry is also seeing a need for having some sort of a computation mechanism where you are able to work with different hardwares. You should not have to throw away your stack and start afresh tomorrow if we actually see that one of these moves forward. And the way technology evolves, we suspect that everything will move forward to some extent, and then it will be a while before some major winners would emerge, right? So, and there could be disruption along the way. We cannot discount for that. So so that's definitely one thing, in terms of how we create a full-fledged stack which allows pieces to be pulled in and taken out, so that there is compatibility. People are more easily willing to invest in these areas, right? I think that's one thing that I'm seeing. But my question to you, Professor Urbasi Sinha, is what do you think about photonic-based computing? And Arun, if you have some thoughts, that will be great as well.
So photonic based computing is something actually which has become very much in the news these days because of this company which has invested a lot of resources in this very recently in California. So this is about having an all optical quantum computing. So essentially the input and the gate operations and so it will be all integrated. So it's integrated chip based approach is what is being envisaged, and so all the gate operations will also happen at a chip-based domain and so on. And in fact, one of the advantages of thinking about photons generally has always been that it is not going to require your dilution refrigerator type cooling, which the solid state quantum computers do. You have to go down to your millikelvin, microkelvin. Here, you need not do that. This is usually room temperature. So that is one of the bigger advantages of a photonic platform for anything, really. That you don't really need to cool down to that extent. It will be smaller also. The things that you see now are these room-sized devices, but then the photonic one is not expected to. But then, of course, one of the problems that has been long-standing in photons has been the the two photons talking to one another. So if you want multi-qubit operations like the CNOT, So then how do you do that? And so now the solutions are emerging on how you can make that happen, because photons are so good in communication that they don't really like to talk to each other per se. They just carry the message forward in some sense. But then that is not a thing that you want in a computer. You want them to communicate with each other. And so these things are now becoming very much possible and doable by easier and easier ways of doing this, is what people are investigating. And so it has, while we talk about the superconducting devices and the silicon based ones, which usually we tend to talk about, suddenly you might just see that the photonic guy emerges the winner in 10 years time, because the field is still open, and
Right.
photons are definitely a strong contender.
Sure,
Given
sure.
various, so that is my take on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So now coming back, and I think this photonic conversation really brings us back to the question of, so what's really happening in India? If you could quickly talk about what's happening in India from a communication perspective, and then Professor Arun, what's happening from a compute perspective, I think that will be very insightful.
Sure. So, in the communications perspective, of course, so I mean, our own lab at RRI, so we are working on different different types of quantum communication. So we have around 4 projects now. So one of them is this first satellite-based QKD project that we have in India, which is called Quantum Experiments Using Satellite Technology. It's a collaboration between RRI and ISRO. Then we are working on chip-based QKD. Which is, just like we talked about chip-based quantum computing, you can also think about chip-based QKD. So that is another method. Then we are working on what is called quantum teleportation, which is another means of communication, which does not involve key distribution and random number generation, so many things. So that is us, and we have been there for almost 10 years. So then there are many, other labs in research institutes which are coming up, which are working on, photon sources, creating photons. Some protocol demonstration is also happening. Free space and fiber, both things that we are investigating. There are government agencies like ISRO and DRDO, as well as CDAC, which is a part of MIT. These guys have taken a lot of recent interest in this, and they're coming up with programs which would sort of mature over the next few years towards making all this happen. There are companies also which are starting to make these products, QKD product, as well as some other types of products. So these are there. And so, it is actually a very, I think, one of the most popular things to think about right now, and especially with this, as Reena and Arun both are aware. So we have this declaration of this national mission on quantum technology and applications, which has happened by the government of India in this year itself. And so there is a new enthusiasm for labs to actually take up quantum communication, for instance, and even computing, but Arun will talk about that. And so these things are going to mature, and then we will feed into this ecosystem when the national mission finally is rolling. There will be lots of capacity that will be built towards it and during it, and so it's a very thriving field so far as our country is concerned. Yeah.
All right, great. And Professor Arun, what do you think about the compute side? What's happening in India?
Yeah, so I mean, in India, the research on theoretical side almost started 30 years back, and what 3 decades, we have seen a surge of interest among not only among young people, also many potential researchers also has actually emerged. They have actually set up their lab in quantum computing. So on experimental side, if you try to figure out, there is one group at TIFR Bombay, so they are dealing with superconducting qubits, and currently they are able to make about 3 qubit, which is far less compared to what IBM doing, but hopefully they will be able to scale up slowly. And I think at IISc Bangalore there is another new group they are coming up again with superconducting qubit. I think it will be right to mention also. Professor Anil Kumar at IISc Bangalore, he started also especially how to implement like Dirichlet's algorithm or source algorithm or this so-called quantum search Gross algorithm with so-called nuclear magnetic resonance NMR setup way back in 98 or so. So almost 20 years back, that group was quite active, but now he retired, so he is no more into this NMR quantum computing. But some of his students who are at IJR Pune and IJR Mohali, they are conducting still carrying out this NMR quantum computing stuff. And uh, there are a couple of groups who are trying to enter into so-called quantum dot and things like that, maybe NV Center, but not it, So we have to still wait and see, how far or how long it will take really to have at least few qubit quantum processors. So that is not very clear. But yeah, at least I mean, on theoretical side, there are many people working on on quantum computing and quantum information, quantum algorithms in India. So, for example, at HRI, we have, including myself, we have two more faculties, and we have about 12 PhD students and 6 postdocs. One of the largest group in quantum computing in India we have at HRI. So they work on various things, interface of quantum computing, many body physics, what kind of devices will be suitable, physical systems suitable for quantum information processing and quantum computing. So they explore that kind of thing. So yeah, a lot of things are happening in India. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So I know we are, being aware of the time. I'm going to, ask you one last question each.
Mhm.
So what do you see this world as? And I'm going to keep it very generic, 10 years from now. And I'm
Mhm.
assuming that somewhere quantum is at this helm of how you're going to see the world. But how would you see the world 10 years from now?
So you would like me to answer this or?
Yes, Professor Arun, please go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah. So I mean the way industries and companies are taking interest, it is not out of place to say that in next 10 years we will see really a big change or maybe a complete revolution. At least, till now we don't know what kind of physical system, as you pointed out, we don't know yet which system will be the winner of so-called quantum computing paradigm. So we don't know that yet. So whether this is superconducting or ion trap or photonic, we don't know that, right? So maybe we need completely new physical system which will really scale up to 1,000 qubits. Who knows? Because I mean, history tells us that the way we are dealing with a classical computing device, say 20, 30 years back, and the way we deal now, I mean, completely, dramatic change has happened over 30 years, right? So similar thing may happen in 10 years or may happen in 20 years, but at least I think there is a lot of hope that something will emerge in next 10 years. Yes. So,
Thank
yeah.
you. I mean, I really like that 10-year thing because, I don't know if you've heard, there's a popular Bill Gates quote where he says
Mhm.
that people always overestimate what they can do in 2 years, and they
Mhm.
almost always underestimate what can be done in 10 years, right? And history
Exactly.
has shown us that.
Exactly.
History has shown us that, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
the internet progress itself, right? If somebody had tried to project at that point in time what it would look like 10 years from now,
Mhm.
I think all projections were underestimates. So, with that note,
Mhm.
and I've already put the pressure on you by giving that analogy, Urbasi, Professor Urbasi, what do you think? What is the
Well,
10 years future?
so far as this is concerned, Arun and I mostly always agree. So then, I mean, I would definitely say that I agree with what he has said, but I will speak a little bit more from the quantum communication perspective because that is
That's
more,
what I meant.
for
Yeah,
me,
that's what
yeah.
I meant.
So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I actually want to have a little bit of a philosophical statement here. So, see, one thing we have to realize is that even now, whatever it is that we are doing, our computer, which is helping us in this conversation, this is based on laws of quantum mechanics. So it's not, I mean, everything is described by quantum mechanics even now. But the point is that now we are actually talking about applications where the quantum is going to be required to be understood by people more because we are at that domain. We are at the single particle domain, and so then you can't have a classical explanation. So here we are usually dealing with a limit type thing, classical limit is working. So that is what will happen. So after 10 years, so if I think about communication, definitely we will have at least 10 quantum satellites up there. So our own will be there from India, of course, but then there are these other countries which I'm telling you are already also working, and so all of these satellites definitely will be there in this time frame. So we would have communication between different ground stations intra-country, but then we also have plans of connecting these satellites up. So there's going to be inter-satellite communication. So this means that we will have intra within the country and inter-satellite. So essentially going already towards our global quantum communication network, which is what we want to do, right? And then fiber thing will of course be very much, also developed. So we will have these backbones. So backbones for doing what is possible through fiber, satellites connecting up. So a version of what we envisage for this quantum communication network, which is global, is going to start to emerge in that 10-year time frame. But then of course there's going to be more happening after that. So we'll have some skeletal network already existing, but of course different countries may not want to talk to each other, so then that has to be solved after the 10-year time frame, but then this will happen. And then the other thing is, of course, quantum sensing. I think we have not really talked about it at all, but then sensing is one of those things which actually is very much happening already. Just like QKD, quantum sensing is one of those things which is very much practical now, and so this will see a lot of development over the 10-year time frame as well. So will be used in medical, applications. And Reena already mentioned about some of these. So these will actually. So what I'm saying is, what we are doing now at a research level and some at a company level and all this will mature into becoming more a part of our life in 10 years' time. My phone, not only this special Samsung phone which has the random number, but then maybe all phones will come with an inbuilt random. Maybe we will have this chip-based QKD actually working, and so things we will start using quantum in our daily lives knowingly a lot more, because unknowingly we're anyway using it. So this is the point, So it is 10 years is actually a very good time frame for us to meet again and see how much we have achieved, and I'm sure we will hopefully live through this period. But then having said that, I'm quite sure with theory, experiment, and the government agencies and are taking an important, taking a lot of interest. This is all very nice because industry, government, academia, together we will have to do this. And so this is already happening in different countries, even in India. And so I am going to exercise every day so that I live to see what happens in 10 years time, because it is exciting.
Amen to that, and I amen to that, and it will.
Yeah.
And I think, if I want to summarize what both of you said, and I heard you say that as well, Urvashi, I think a lot of it also depends on what is the direction that people take. And I think that's why Arun's pragmatic approach about where it is likely to be. And I think maybe if I can, have a little bit of audacity to summarize it by saying that if enough money and enough brains are put behind this, right, then, we can see a very, very different world 10 years from now. And,
Definitely.
people have to look at the past, whether it is the governments who are looking at the investments that have to go in. They have to do it for the long haul, not for do something today, get results tomorrow. They have to look at a 10-year, 5-year time frame, go beyond the political boundaries of what it means to get things done immediately. And when we look at a longer term horizon, we see interesting things like quantum optimization solutions today, or the QKD stuff that can be used today, right? And all of that starts coming in anyways, right? So I think that, and then enough researchers and younger people getting into startups in this space, right? That early in your life, that's the time you can take risks. And if this is an area of interest to people, they should be utilizing all the great thing that is happening by governments taking interest. There is a support coming in and all that. People should actually start startups in this space, do more applied work in this space. And I don't think of there's any problem on this world, if human brains go behind that problem in a very, very concerted manner, which cannot be solved, right? So I think I I have that optimistic viewpoint, about how things can turn out. Of course, bringing in the pragmatism that both of you talked about, that it depends. If you withdraw, then nothing will happen. If you
So,
push it, then
Yeah, yeah,
something even greater will happen, right? So
exactly.
great. I think that was a pretty interesting discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I can see Suman is back here. And I also see that there are a lot of questions there, Suman. I'm going to be picking up those questions and
Yes, please.
redirecting them to either one of you, and sometimes I'll open up both the questions to you. I have Arjun Bhattacharya, who's a student, and he says how quantum computing can revolutionize healthcare, MRI, and cerebral therapy, and other biomedical solutions. So maybe I think I should take that question, and then I'll hand it over to you if you have something to add. So, Arjun, I hope this question was asked before I talked about the solutions. I think quantum computing can revolutionize healthcare in many ways. Just if you look at quantum inspired algorithms, drug discovery can happen faster. MRI scans can happen faster. Can optimize how that can be done. There are better ways. Apart from that, the way devices work today, right? They can be, using some of the sensing technologies. I think there are, as Urvashi, Professor Urvashi rightly pointed out, there is a lot of work that can be done using novel devices and sensors for, doing better diagnosis for various kinds of issues. That's something that I have. Is there something else you want to add, Professor Urvashi?
no, I think, yeah, I think it summarizes it well. I mean, the sensing is, of course, going to be the way in which, I mean, that is the idea, right? And also, there is this drug delivery application which can benefit from certain advances in computing.
Sure.
But then, otherwise, yeah, so MRI, all these things are, of course, examples of scanners, right? So, if you can replace the sensing there with a more advanced version, then, of course, you can imagine that it would have
Not
ramifications. So,
only
yeah,
not
I
only
think
that,
that's.
not only that, people are developing so-called quantum imaging. So if you can use entangled kind of probe to
Photon.
enhance the MRI, so you can have a better picture, better quality, high
Yeah, at the
resolution.
heart.
That is the idea, right? Yeah.
So it will
Absolutely. I
definitely
think,
help. Yes. So,
yeah, I think, Arjun, I think that's a very fair answer to your question. There's a lot that can be done in the healthcare space,
mm,
especially. Now,
yeah.
Ashok Bhaktu Vatsalam, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who's the managing director for KGISL Institute of Technology. He's talking about, is there an easy way to set up a small quantum internet network within a campus? And this question is for, I guess, is for you, Urvashi.
Yeah, so this is of course what is being planned now. So the idea is that we want point-to-point QKD, and then we would like to see that we can have, instead of 2 point, we can actually have 3, let's say. So that would be the that would make it more in the genre of multi thing. And so in fact there is a lot of advancement that has happened in different countries, and recently, I mean, they have actually claimed many nodes in this sort of a thing. So within campus is the first step, and then of course there is the citywide network. So indeed it is, I mean, it's possible, and we are working on that here as well. So first, of course, you need point to point, only then you can go multi-point, but then that is already happening, and work is happening on that.
All right.
Yeah.
I think
So
there is one more question, Reena, which has been asked by Ramesh Tamankar for Professor Urvashi. The question is, would like to know a little bit more about the status of qubit design and fabrication in India. He would really excited to know about the opportunities if there are any.
Yeah, this fabrication is a point I actually wanted to also raise. So thanks for raising this. So indeed, we are of course making superconducting devices as well as semiconductor based ones in some of the labs, as Arun already mentioned. But then we really want, this is something we are asking for, hopefully in the near future, to have dedicated fabrication facility where we can actually manufacture only these quantum dots, as well as, because these superconducting devices, they actually contaminate the system, for instance. So if you use it along with, say, gold or something, then it's not going to work. So you need a dedicated one for this layer that they are after. Let's say copper based or something. So the idea is that we really want, either we want to upgrade our current fabrication facilities, so there are 2 or 3 national ones, and include and augment them with only the requirements for these semiconductor and superconducting people, because these are the ones which need more fabrication. But then we are also really looking forward to having a silicon foundry where we can have these integrated photonics devices also fabricated in-house, because this is very expensive. And so, indeed, if people from different industries are here, and it would be a very good thing for them to actually, work, have a united voice towards such demands, because otherwise, if just academics make that demand, it may not be very nice. But then if the semiconductor industry comes in and wants dedicated fab facilities for quantum computing purposes, I think we will go somewhere with this. So indeed, this is something we need. We don't have dedicated ones, and there's a lot of opportunity once that happens. So it's a great question, and I wanted to talk about it at some point. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
So there's another question from Anuj Mehrotra, who's the CTO for IOTA ONEIQ Solutions. Shouldn't quantum computing and communication be considered 2 different verticals with quantum mechanics in intersection? And that's kind of correct, right? I mean, in the sense that it's a specialization, it's a different specialization. And even, you have companies working on this, they would be working on slightly different things using the underlying concepts of quantum physics. Right?
But there is one thing, no, Marina, that if you have these different quantum computers, the quantum computers can be connected to each other. And
right,
so that
through the network.
Through the network. So then in some sense, they will come together at some point. So we need these quantum computing nodes, and then of course we need the network. So in fact, the word vertical is interesting, because that is how this is being used in these various documents. And so there are 2 separate verticals, but there is a lot of synergy between them actually. Once they both attain a certain level of maturity, then they will talk.
They are complementary. They're both needed.
They're complementary.
Yeah. There's a question: how far are we from building supercomputer, and how can this be related to quantum computing? And also, how secure is it in terms of cyber threats? This is a question from Santosh Tandon, Information Security Analyst, Wipro. And I guess, Professor Arun, if you could take that question. How far are we from building supercomputer in India?
So
I think we already have.
Supercomputers already have.
Yeah.
Already we have one. Yeah. Already we have one, but whatever supercomputer you talk about, they are essentially classical computer. Okay, so they can never be a quantum computer. So the kind of thing that you can do on a quantum computer, you can never do on a supercomputer. Okay, so that is the great distinction you should keep in mind. And what is the next question?
How is it secure in terms of cyber threats? I think he's talking about how secure is the supercomputer from cyber threats.
Yeah.
Supercomputer. That question maybe you can take maybe. Veena.
Yeah. So I think today, I think Professor Urbasi talked about it today. This definitely, we have good security protocols that are working for now. And theoretically, when a quantum computer is there, a reasonably scaled up quantum computer, then some of the existing RSA algorithms, etc., will become obsolete, or they will not be secure any longer. But for now, it's a theoretical construct. So, in general, there's a lot of focus on post-quantum cryptography, which is identifying lattice-based algorithms and other algorithms which are not breakable by a quantum computer, right? So apart from QKD, that's the other approach that people are taking. So if I want to answer your question at a very generic level, the state of the art in cryptography is working hand in hand and is definitely several steps ahead of everything else right now. So I think we should feel secure in that context.
Yeah.
Hackers aside, yeah.
I think one more, Ramesh Tamankar, who asked the previous question, which Professor Urvashi was answering about the qubit part. He has added a question. He wants to know what are the government funding possibilities in the area of qubit design and fabrication?
That's
He,
a loaded
he,
question. So,
he
so I
says
mean,
he has some experience in this direction.
so everyone in this panel would agree that without such support, all this. I mean, as we said, we have all these wonderful visions of where we see things happening in 10 years, but that will not happen. And Reena very nicely, eloquently said that it has to come with some resources and brains, human resource and actual financial resources. So then in terms of government funding, we actually have an ongoing program from the DST, the Department of Science and Technology, which is called the Quantum Enabled Science and Technology Program. And so that started, a year or so ago. And there are some projects which have been funded under that. It's an umbrella program for both computing and communications. We ourselves, of course, have one of them. Arun is our collaborator. So that is something, but that is more for, funding capacity building research in labs which are kind of looking at that. And of course, we have done the capacity building, so we are looking at a more challenging problem. But then that is still at a somewhat moderate scale. I think that was the way the government started exploring this funding. And then we have our own project on satellite QKD, which is called Quantum Experiments Using Satellite Technology. That is an ISRO funding. Then there is a DRDO project on quantum computing. And so there are three or four of these efforts. The Quest, this DST one is the umbrella one. But what we are really looking forward is this national mission, which has been declared this year. And so I have been a part of the process of writing a draft project report for it. And so it is undergoing different stages of approval. And so all of us in the panel would definitely hope that that will converge at some point. And then that would be a very large amount of resource which has been promised at the moment. And so, of course, we do not know exactly how much of it will materialize and when, but given the current situation with COVID and all, I think there are some priorities there as well. But then, I mean, with this declaration and all this work that has gone in, as I said before, I would remain hopeful that this will happen soon. And then, there is an opportunity, at least the way this has been constructed by the academics, that it is open to research, academia, institutes and academia, industry, startups, as well as the government agencies. So there is going to be different types of research conducted by these different agencies. So this is something we are looking forward to, though it has not yet started. So we hope that it will soon.
Yeah. So
That's my answer. Arun, please.
Short answer is yes.
Yes, Arun has suddenly have had a cup of coffee and he's now suddenly very, very optimistic. So and of course, as I mentioned, we always agree. So, but then we have to say that, if you say yes, Arun, somebody will say when, and you don't dare answering that one. So then
I thought we agreed. I thought we agreed in our earlier discussion that all people who are interested in physics are optimists by nature.
Yeah. So the probability of that is always high. We are a biased community. Yeah. And Reena, with due respect, the physicists are not a very rich community. So all they have is their passion and optimism. Otherwise, Arun and I would not really survive. So, so this is what drives us. So we will remain eternal optimists and hope other people share this optimism, because that is necessary, of course, beyond the point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm actually sort of counting myself as a physics enthusiast. I'm counting myself in that as well. Yeah.
But with you have this Microsoft tag, which I'm hoping will be handy even to the physicists. So you're in a good position. Let's put it that way. You're a super position.
Yeah, there's an India angle that I'm, sort of highlighting more in this conversation today. But of course, you can say it's a superposition between my Microsoft role and the fact that I'm an Indian and who's very interested in knowing, taking, seeing this move forward in India.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Suman, what do you want us to do? We are at 5:50.
I think we can take a couple of more questions, Reena, and then summarize it. We still have 10 minutes. We started off about 5 minutes late, so I think that should be fine.
All right. So, uh, can you help us with which questions to pick up? I'm seeing
See,
some
somebody,
questions.
R. Hota, who's the doctor at the Central Institute of Technology, he's questioned when you talk about security in quantum information system, is it related to a wave function collapse?
Arun, you go ahead. Arun is our
Yeah, so
function collapse guy. Yeah.
yeah, in some sense, so in some sense, the answer is yes. But let me tell you a little more. So when you deal with quantum information, they kind of respect several, limitations. That you don't see in classical information processing. Okay, so for example, as Urvashi pointed out, there is something called no cloning theorem. You cannot make a copy of a quantum state, or you cannot make a copy of a qubit. So when you want to make a copy, essentially you will disturb it. So disturbance means essentially you will try to measure it, and it will lead to collapse. So the answer is yes. So because of this, I mean, there are not only this no cloning, there are several other things that comes into play. So because of all these limitations, quantum information is essentially kind of a private information. Okay, so the privacy is or security is kind of inbuilt. It is not that you design; it is already designed by nature. Once you're dealing with quantum system or qubits, this security comes almost for free. I mean, I'm not saying all kind of security, but certain kind of security comes almost for free. Okay, so that is the kind of thing nature offers to you, and and you have to live that. Okay, so
Thank you, Professor Arun. One more question. I think there are a few. If I could pick one, I think it's about a lot of people wants to know, and Priya Nankarni, who is a PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, wants to know, could you give a brief insight into the industry job opportunities available in the field of quantum computing and communication in India? You would want to go for it, Reena, and then Professor Rubasi.
I would like to say that this is an emerging area. New opportunities are coming up. These opportunities are coming up slowly in India. The ramp up is much faster in some other countries. Okay,
Mhm.
but it's ramping up slowly in India, and I think what we will see is that as we reach an inflection point, that the ramp up will be much more rapid. The other thing, and then the reason why I'm pointing it out in this manner is that when somebody wants to consider a career in quantum, they have to plan way in advance, right? I mean, you can't suddenly, um, and sometimes opportunities come in very different ways. For example, one of the somebody who's involved in all the solutioning related, overall head for programs from a product management perspective for quantum, right? She actually spent a lot of time. She studied in physics and quantum physics, and then she spent a considerable amount of time doing something else. And then
Hmm.
later, as this sector suddenly became more interesting, she actually shifted back to quantum, right? And we are seeing a lot of that in the first wave, right?
True.
As we've seen this rapid progress in the last couple of years in quantum compared to the previous decade,
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of people actually come back and do that. And interestingly, there were people who were actually deeply involved in research throughout, as is the example of both of the professors here, right? I mean, they've been dedicated to quantum for a reasonable amount of time, and so many students who are working or postdocs under them would have been doing it for a reasonable period. Now, remember that this is an early stage in the computing revolution from a quantum perspective. You are redefining how computing is going to happen. So, the nature of collaborations that are happening between the industry and academia are much more intertwined, as you would have seen at the beginning of the like the communication revolution or the beginning of the compute revolution on the classical side. So we are in that incubation phase. There's a lot more collaboration happening. Boundary lines are a little blurred. Applied research theoretical research as well as research happening in companies. It's linked together. Many companies have partnerships with education, research institutes, right, where there is a much more direct involvement in the kind of work that is happening worldwide. And there is also this whole concept of the ecosystem, right? So there is a need to build skill in this space, right? Because when you think of quantum computing and you think of how solutioning needs to happen, your classical mindset does not support that kind
I
of
think you're
thinking.
breaking a little there, Reena.
I'm saying that the classical mindset does not support that kind of thinking. So what happens is that there's a definite need for people to skill up to actually even program thinking or write algorithms in terms of, you can be a researcher on the quantum information side, but then to see the practical application of that, you would like to try it out using a programming language which supports that, right? So for example, Microsoft has Q Sharp, uh, and QDK, while IBM has Qiskit, and everybody has their own version of how you can translate those algorithms into actual code that runs, right? And so this is more on the software side. On the hardware side, like I said, there are a lot of startups coming up. There are regions in US, Netherlands, Australia, Singapore, Japan, and of course, definitely in China, because we don't know a lot more about the startups in China, but then we are seeing a lot of startups coming up. So that's where and in India we've seen startups in the communication QKD side, on the ML, quantum and ML side, and also I'm hoping we'll see more startups on the compute side itself, like the actual qubit generation and so on. So I think opportunities, I would say, are there. They are smaller in number right now, but they are gradually increasing, and after an inflection point there will be sudden increase, is how I would put it.
True. Thank you.
Just
I
wanted
think
to
yes.
give an example. So, in fact, one person who graduated in quantum algorithms from IISc got a job in Bosch. I mean, so the point is that there are companies which are, maybe hiring one or two people to just, as Reena was saying, so this is more like a testing phase now to figure out how it can be useful to them. And so there is a lot of collaboration between industry and academia. But then, yeah, once this inflection point comes, then we will probably see a lot more a lot more development on the industry side. At the moment, we are still at that level of,
And
testing waters is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So last
I will add one more. I will add one more example. So one of our postdoc recently joined one company. I forgot the name of the company. So in Bangalore, he joined. So private
Right.
company, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to share an example as well. In the last summer, I actually hired a few interns to work on at a software level, work on a quantum project. Yeah, so
Super. There you have it, Priya. If you're there and listening, the future looks bright, and it's always emerging as a field. I think with that, Reena, we have summed up the questions. It's about time if you could just summarize the key takeaways in the session for the audience, and then we could thank the speakers and move on.
sure. So I think it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation. And for the benefit of the audience, I think we talked about the state of the art in quantum computing, in quantum communications, in quantum solutions, what's happening, what is it, what's happening worldwide, internationally, what's happening in India, what is the potential, right? And I hope we've tried to keep the conversation at a level very, very consciously, where we've not gone into the depth of the technology or the theory in quantum physics, but try to keep it at a level where everybody can understand what the real potential of this is. Sometimes people think it's a myth. We want to let you know, and I hope we've been successful, is that it's not a myth. It's something which is here and now in a certain form, and has the potential to reach a much more evolved and a much more beneficial form for humanity in the future. And and I believe that if you can think of this whole thing as an abstraction of what computing and communication and sensing is, and just think of the underlying technology changing, then you will realize the potential of what it has to offer. and I think quoting Arun talked about the fact that you can do things with quantum which you cannot do with classical, right? And I think that's important. How do you solve the world's biggest problems, right? Which are there? How do you mimic nature? This is based, and Urvashi talked about this is based on how nature works, right? And therefore, this is closer to gives you a power to probably mimic some of the processes that nature has. An example of that is if you look at how nature creates fertilizer, how bacteria do nitrogen fixation. It's a very low energy process, right? And through quantum, we have the possibility of actually achieving a kind of parallelism that allows you to mimic those processes and those kind of chemical reactions, or with more than chemical reactions in certain cases, and create a much better world for all of us. So I think that's the summary I would like to, as the person who was moderating, before I hand it over to you, Suman, I want to really thank Professor Arun and Professor Urvashi for such a inspiring discussion. I know we all of us know each other, but this discussion has been really nice and very, very invigorating and interesting for me. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. I think the audience echoes everything you said. Wishing everyone a very, very good weekend, and please take care of yourselves and stay safe. We'll again see you next week.
So thank you very much as well.
Suman,
So thanks to
Thank you.
Ayush and all of you for this wonderful
wonderful
discussion.
Thank you.
For the audience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, bye.